There is a particular kind of suffering that modern life specializes in producing. It is not the suffering of loss exactly, or failure, or pain. It is the suffering that comes from the gap between how things are and how you believe they are supposed to be. The job that is not as meaningful as you expected. The relationship that is more complicated than you thought it would be. The version of yourself that keeps not arriving on schedule. Psychologists call this the suffering of resistance. The additional layer of pain that comes not from the difficult thing itself, but from your refusal to accept that the difficult thing is real. And here is what I want to tell you today. The Japanese have understood this for centuries. They built it into their aesthetic philosophy. They called it Wabi Sabi. We have talked about Wabi Sabi in previous videos, the beauty of imperfection, the value of incompleteness, what Japanese design knows about flaws, that Western design does not. Today I want to look at the aspect of Wabi Sabi that I think matters most for how we actually live, what it says about acceptance, about control, about the mental cost of fighting reality, and the strange peace that comes from stopping. Let me start with the word Mujo. Mujo is a Japanese Buddhist term that means impermanence, the fact that nothing lasts, that every state of joy, of suffering, of comfort, of struggle is temporary, that the person you are today is not the person you were 10 years ago, and not the person you will be 10 years from now, that the world around you is always in motion, always changing, never arriving at a fixed final state. For most of us in the West, this is a depressing idea. We resist it. We build our lives around the opposite premise, that good things can be made permanent. If we work hard enough and plan carefully enough and hold on tightly enough, we invest enormous energy in stabilizing what is inherently unstable. Mujo does not offer comfort in the conventional sense. It does not tell you that things will get better. It tells you something more radical, that nothing is permanent, including the thing that is causing you pain right now. The difficult period you are in will pass not because life will grant you relief, but because nothing, by its nature, can stay the same. But Mujo also tells you something that cuts the other way. The good things will pass too. The beautiful moment you are in right now will end. The person you love will change. The achievement you are proud of will fade in significance. This is not a reason for despair. It is a reason to be fully present in what is good while it is here. This is where Mujo connects to what psychologists now call savoring, the practice of fully experiencing positive states, rather than already beginning to mourn their ending. The Japanese practice of hanami, gathering beneath cherry trees to watch the blossoms, is perhaps the most famous cultural embodiment of this. The blossoms are celebrated specifically because they fall so quickly. They last roughly 2 weeks. That brevity is not a tragedy to be mourned. It is the entire point. Their impermanence is not despite what makes them beautiful. It is the very source of it. If cherry blossoms bloomed year-round, no one would gather to watch them. We would walk beneath them without looking up, the way we walk beneath trees, in every season without stopping to notice them. Mujo teaches that presence, full, attentive presence, is only available to the person who has accepted that this moment will pass. The person who is fighting impermanence is always somewhere else in the past. They are trying to hold on to, or the future they are trying to secure. The person who has accepted it is here. Now I want to talk about control, because the mental health crisis of our time is, more than anything else, a control crisis. We live in an era of unprecedented individual agency. We can choose our careers, our cities, our relationships, our identities. We can curate our environments and our information, and our social circles to an extraordinary degree. And somehow this has not made us more at peace. It has in many measurable ways made us less so. The reason I think is this: the expansion of individual control has come with an implicit promise that was always false. The promise that if you make the right choices, optimize the right variables, manage the right inputs, you can produce the life you want. That the outcomes are in principle controllable. That if things are not going as you planned, it is because you have not yet found the right strategy, or the right mindset, or the right morning routine. This is an incredibly expensive belief to hold, because it means that every difficulty, every disappointment, every failure to arrive where you expected, these are not experiences to be accepted and moved through. They are problems to be solved, deficiencies in your system, failures of management. Wabi Sabi offers a completely different premise. The Wabi Sabi worldview does not begin with the assumption that the ideal state is available to you if you optimize correctly. It begins with the observation that the real state, imperfect, incomplete, subject to forces you did not choose and cannot fully control, is the only state that exists, and that working with that reality rather than against it is not resignation. It is the beginning of actual peace. There is a Japanese concept called Ukeireru acceptance, not passive acceptance in the sense of giving up or not caring. Active acceptance, the deliberate decision to let the reality of something land fully, rather than bouncing it away with resistance. The distinction is important. Resistance is not the same as action. You can fully accept that something is hard and still work to change it. In fact, full acceptance often makes you more effective at change, because you are working with an accurate picture of what is actually true, rather than what you wish were true. What acceptance removes is the secondary suffering. The suffering that comes not from the difficult thing itself, but from the fight against its existence, the exhaustion of refusing to acknowledge what is real, the loneliness of pretending to be fine when you are not, the enormous energy expenditure of trying to maintain a version of yourself, or your life that does not match what is actually happening. Notice how much of your mental energy on any given day goes toward that fight. The low-level resistance to circumstances you cannot change, the loop of thoughts about how things should be different, the gap between what is and what you believe. Should be that gap is where enormous amounts of human energy disappear, silently every day. That secondary suffering is optional. Wabi Sabi knows this. It is the suffering of resistance, and resistance is a choice, though often it does not feel like one. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like in practice. Grief is a state that our culture handles badly, in part because we treat it as a problem to be resolved. We give it timelines. We measure recovery. We assess whether a person is moving on at the appropriate pace. And in doing so, we add to the already enormous weight of grief the additional burden of performing grief incorrectly. The Japanese aesthetic tradition around impermanence offers a different relationship to loss. The falling of the cherry blossom is not a failure of the tree. It is the tree doing exactly what it is supposed to do. The beauty of the blossom and the falling of the blossom are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. Applied to grief, the depth of loss is inseparable from the depth of what was loved. The two things are the same thing seen from different angles. And the practice of Mujo, of truly accepting impermanence, rather than fighting, it does not make grief smaller. But it can remove the added suffering of believing that grief itself is wrong, that it should not be happening, that something has gone wrong with you for feeling it. Grief in the Mujo frame is not a problem. It is the correct response to a real loss. It is the form that love takes when the thing loved is no longer present. There is one more idea I want to leave you with, because I think it is the most practically useful of everything we have covered. The Japanese phrase is Shikata ganai. It translates roughly as, "It cannot be helped." In English, that sounds like defeat. In Japanese cultural context, it carries something different. Not resignation, but a kind of practical clarity. The acknowledgement that some things are outside your control, combined with the understanding that spending your energy on fighting those things is a form of waste. Of yourself, of your time, of your life. Shikata ganai is not giving up on what can be changed. It is the wisdom to distinguish between what can and cannot be changed, and to stop paying the enormous cost of refusing to acknowledge the difference. Wabi Sabi is, at its core, a practice of that same wisdom. The beauty it finds in imperfection. And impermanence is not a consolation prize for failing to achieve the ideal. It is the recognition that the ideal was always the wrong target. That the real, complicated, imperfect, impermanent, outside your full control is not the obstacle to a good life. It is the only place a good life can actually be lived. Shikata ganai. It cannot be helped. And sometimes, that is the most freeing sentence in the world. If this way of thinking speaks to you, follow this channel. There is more Japanese wisdom where this came from.